Hey everybody, Brian Neubert here again from goldenblack.com, live in his box that will soon be a different color. Very exciting news. This afternoon I'm picking up paint. By the end of the weekend, I think the room will be a different color. We have chosen rhinestone. Is it actually the color that the walls will be? I would play the song, but it would be a copyright violation on YouTube, so we'll not play Rhinestone Cowboy, but by Monday, the walls should be rhinestone. Hope it works. Didn't want to step out too far from a risk-taking perspective because this has to be done right because it's not getting done again, and that will be that. Anyway, this is your goldenblack.com daily quarantine simulcast for the first day of May, I believe it is. Time is flying, isn't it? This is brought to you by Follett's Purdue Bookstores, Purdue Federal Credit Union, the 6th Street Dive Restaurant, First Source Bank, East End Grill, and the Charters Team Remaxability Plus. We have some breaking news here on the Daily Quarantine. The East End Grill has now joined our group of restaurant friends that are open for carryout. They open for carryout today, so please keep in mind the East End Grill, 6th Street Dive, Arnie's, Bruno's, and the Whitaker Inn for takeout if you want to get a great dinner or simply support our local businesses, or preferably both. So please keep them in mind. There's been a topic here I don't think I've covered on this thing. It has all run together. We've now done about 30 of these things, which blows my mind. But people obviously are very interested in Purdue's 2021 basketball recruiting picture, and I don't think I've really done anything on that to this point, which would seem like gross negligence on my part because that would be one of the most obvious sort of topics people would be interested in, but here we are finally getting to it. So I figured what I would do is just run through some of the prospects, run through some scenarios and whatnot for Purdue as it comes to the 2021 recruiting class. Obviously, on paper, Purdue only has 2 scholarships. Matt Harm's transfer does not change anything because that scholarship was already spoken for. I do think there are options for Purdue to potentially oversign if they can get the right guys to come in and take 3 instead of 2. And then obviously there is a measure of risk involved in that. The numbers ultimately have to boil themselves down to 13 for the fall semester of next year, or the year the class would enroll. But that is an option at Purdue's disposal. They have been open, I think, to oversigning in the past. I don't think they've ever actually done it, gotten it done, but I think that they have been open to it, and this year, if there's any a year, this would be a year they would be open to it because Purdue's on a number of really good players with only so much space to fill. Obviously, Purdue's on the board already with a really good player, Caleb First from Fort Wayne Blackhawk Christian, who is a 6'8", 6'9"-ish, probably closer to 6'9"-ish, probably on his way to 6'10" potentially. 4'5", who's a top 40 player nationally. Chose Purdue over Michigan State, Virginia, Ohio State, and a veritable cast of thousands. He is obviously a really good player, one of the best front court players in the country, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinions, and a great start to this class. This is a really important class for Purdue's front court because obviously Travion Williams' time at Purdue is going to be winding down here after this season. Purdue has a bit of an opening at the forward spot right now. We'll need kind of that next stalwart sort of guy up front. And I think Caleb First, while there are no guarantees on any recruit coming in, is a guy who would profile very well toward being that next sort of really good Purdue big man. I think he's a guy who can play a little bit like Caleb Swanigan did in the sense that he can be a center and create some favorable matchups there. But also you can play big with him and not lose a whole lot when he's playing at forward because he has enough skill to him, runs the floor really well, does a lot of very positive things from a skills perspective to where you can play him at either position and have advantages one way or another. Better said, not have the typical disadvantages that would come with playing big. Obviously, big men have to be able to guard away from the basket a little bit, depending on matchups. That would be something he would probably have to adjust to a little bit. But I do think from an offensive perspective, he can create favorable matchups at either forward or center. I think he'll probably play a little bit of both at Purdue. Personally, I think he might be a little bit better suited on the interior as opposed to out on the floor, but I think he can do both very well. What he does really well is he has a pretty well-refined back-to-the-basket scoring game. At the high school level, at least, that should translate. He's a pretty good rebounder, but what he does really well is he's a really good passer. He runs the floor exceptionally. He handles the ball really well. He can shoot jumpers. I don't know if he's elite at that particular phase of his game quite yet, but he is a good mid-range shooter. I don't know exactly how many threes he made during his high school season, but I know that I have seen him do it. I think he can do it. I think it can be part of his game in time. But what really sets him apart is his ability to run the floor, his ability to handle the basketball, his passing ability, and things like that. And I think he's really good in pick and roll. And I think that's such an important part of college basketball offense nowadays. It's a really important part of the offense Purdue is using these days, whether it be designed offense, whether it be motion that puts a lot of ball screens into place. I think he's really good as a slip man. I think he can be a pick and pop guy as a shooter in time, and I think he's a physical enough presence to be a good screen setter. Just a really good player, a really, really good start to this class. Obviously, with limited scholarships, you'd like to get one other guy who's really, really high level at least, and Purdue certainly has a bunch of balls in the air in that sense. Obviously, a guy Purdue fans are paying very close attention to is Harrison Ingram in Dallas, who's a 5-star recruit. I think he's 13th in the country by Rivals.com or thereabout. I've seen him play once, and to be honest with you, I watched him and I knew Purdue was at least on the periphery of his recruitment last spring, and I didn't even bother to sit there and actually watch because I figured that was the kid that Purdue will mess with for a while and then probably I would never hear from again. And I was very wrong. I wasn't so flippant about it. I had somebody else I had to go watch, so it's not like I was just sitting there with my eyes closed out of spite. But he is very good. He is obviously regarded as an elite level prospect, sort of a guy who can sort of play all over the floor, fits really well with modern day positionless sort of basketball, a really versatile, really gifted scorer. And, scoring is important. And I think something Purdue has to adhere to kind of moving forward is, I think, scoring is really important. That sounds like an idiotic thing to say because it's obvious. But what I mean by that is when Purdue was loaded with offensive skill with the Vince Edwards, Dakota Mathias, Carson Edwards, Ryan Klein classes paired with really good big men, I think that was a little bit of a golden age of Purdue basketball in a sense. When they had all those shooters, when they had a lot of scoring options, when they had a lot of offensive punch, they were really good. And I think scoring really, really matters in college basketball nowadays, especially. Whatever you can do to be a really high-octane offensive team is great. And obviously Harrison Ingram is a really, really high-level scorer, a really versatile scorer, a guy who can go get his, a guy who can score off the dribble, a guy who can shoot from the perimeter, a guy who can create matchups probably all over the floor. Just a really, really high-end player. I think Purdue has done a really, really good job with him. I think Purdue right now is recruiting from the top of the pile. Long way to go, most likely. I think that probably stretches into the fall. But Purdue did a great job with the official visit during the season. Purdue has done a great job selling both its university and its basketball program. And I think one thing that really jumps out to me about Harrison Ingram is that he always says about Purdue, or he has several times he says about Purdue things about Purdue would let me play through my mistakes. And that is, I think that tells you something about Harrison Ingram, because most kids, period, let alone most kids that good, would never sit there thinking they're going to make mistakes because they're just not that self-aware about things. But he's a smart kid. He would fit really well at Purdue. He would be a really good basketball player at Purdue. Obviously, Purdue wants him very badly, and I think they have laid out a good plan for him in terms of his ability to come in and be an impact guy right away. Kids that good can do that at a lot of different places, but Purdue has done a good job laying out a multi-layered sort of pitch to him that would also involve, getting him to where he wants to go one day in terms of the NBA, but also a nod to the part where he actually cares about school to a certain extent. I say to a certain extent, he's a very serious student, a very smart kid, but also there comes a point in time with guys like that where you also understand that you have a really good chance to play professional basketball relatively quickly. And but he does want to be a serious student at the next level as well. Purdue has done a good job, I think, proposing a bit of a best of both worlds type of scenario. Stanford is going to be a tough out here. I think the Blue Bloods will all be in on him as well. North Carolina and Kansas have already offered. North Carolina is in pretty deep here as well. I think Purdue, one point I wanted to make during this video was the fact that there's nothing going on right now, that there is no recruiting right now in person. There are no visits. There's no spring evaluation period. It's not such a bad thing for Purdue because under a different set of circumstances, Harrison Ingram would be playing somewhere this weekend, and whether it was this weekend or last weekend, that would have been the spring evaluation period. There's a really good chance Duke and Kentucky would have been sitting there on the sideline watching him. The fact that they're not, that's not such a bad thing. But Purdue has to kind of dig in here. I think Purdue's done a really good job early, but they have to dig in and kind of wait this one out. If they get him, it would be cause for a parade. Trey Kaufman is a forward from Sellersburg, Indiana, down by Louisville, who I think Purdue all along has done a really good job recruiting. I think they have found a kid who fits well from a personality perspective with them, from a skills perspective. I think he's a really good player, better than people know, because I don't know how many people have really seen him play yet. He's kind of a 4-5 as well at this point. Might maybe grow into something one day where he can play a little bit more on the perimeter. I don't know right now if he's necessarily got the quickness to do that. But he's a little bit, I shouldn't say he's a little bit, he's a lot like First in the sense that they're 4-5s. And I know a lot of people think that because Caleb First committed first, no pun intended, and I think it was a win for Purdue to get one or the other. I think there's a general presumption out there that Purdue is out because they've got Caleb First. I do think Caleb First is a complication because they do sort of play the same category, if not the same position. I do think Purdue's done a good job convincing him or arguing to him that they could play together. I think they would be great together, personally, having seen both of them play to a meaningful extent. But obviously, this is the one chance you get as a high school kid to pick the absolute perfect situation. Sometimes the perfect situation isn't a situation where there's a guy at your position already committed. Purdue has to do a good job getting past that. I don't think it's a deal breaker for him by any sense of the imagination. I don't think it's as big a deal as everybody thinks on the surface anyway. But I do think Purdue's done a great job recruiting Trey Kaufman, and I do think that, at least prior to first commitment, they were the team to beat. And I kind of wondered if they wouldn't be the beneficiary of an early decision this spring if everything was normal, if they hadn't already gotten Caleb First. But Purdue, I think, is still very much alive there. Indiana wants him badly. Louisville would like to have him. Xavier has always been there with him. They're in a better spot, I think, than people give them credit for. I think it's been Purdue and Xavier sort of for the long haul with him. Virginia just offered him. Whether or not he'd go that far from home, I'm not entirely certain. But obviously, Virginia has a lot of momentum as a program right now, having just won a national title. It will be very interesting to see how things shake out with Trey Kaufman. I think Purdue has been in a really good spot with him for a very long period of time. Whether or not that has changed after Caleb First's commitment, whether or not that changes with nothing going on right now in the recruiting process, that obviously remains to be seen. Max Christie is a 5-star shooting guard from Chicagoland who, especially earlier in the process, Purdue was in really good shape with. The one thing that Purdue took a hit on from a recruiting perspective with everything shutting down with this extended NCAA dead period is the fact that I think had everything remained normal, I think Purdue would have gotten an official visit from him this spring. And obviously that did not happen. He's been on campus many times. He visited unofficially, if I recall correctly, for the Michigan State game in Mackey Arena this year. Obviously that was a pretty good day for Purdue. He's been on campus I don't know how many times over the years. I know at one point in time Purdue was generally viewed as number one for him, and that was coming from him. That was coming from people around him. Not publicly, but I think there were very strong indications of that at one point in time. That was a long time ago, and that is old information at this point. I do think Purdue is still very much alive with him, but not getting the visit didn't help. Duke has offered him. Duke is the Death Star on this one because I know he has always liked Duke. He's always loved Duke. I know he wants to win, and obviously Duke wins quite a bit. But Michigan State's right there as well. They got his only junior year official visit that I'm aware of late in the season. Villanova and Virginia are both on him too. Whether or not they can, again, get him to go far from home. If anybody can do it, those are two either blue blood or burgeoning blue blood type of programs. So if he can not go to Duke, I think Purdue is a consideration, a player for him. Not getting that official visit didn't help. So we'll see if normalcy resumes again and they can get visits done in the fall. Maybe that happens. But for all I know, he might already be committed by then, because I think a lot of guys are going to commit this spring and summer too. But I think Purdue generally is at an advantage because it's been on all of these guys forever. So it's the people who would only now be coming in on these players that are at the real disadvantage. So Purdue, being as entrenched as they are in this class for as long a period of time as they've been entrenched with this class, I think is an advantage for them when nothing else is going on. The other thing about Max Christie, he's an aviation guy. He wants to do aviation as well. And another guy who's a really high-end prospect who will take academics seriously, who will want to get a legitimate college experience and at least lay the groundwork for a college education, a college diploma, understanding full well that he is gifted enough to where you never know what's going to happen in terms of how long exactly he will be in college. Blake Wesley is a guard from South Bend who is an excellent, excellent athlete, a really, really gifted physical player, a combo guard, sort of a guy who can probably play a little bit of point guard, but is probably better suited at the 2 or the 3. Just a really high-level athlete, a guy who can get to the basket, a guy who can get off the floor, a guy who can do a lot of different things athletically. I've seen, in the little I've seen of him playing, and I would have seen a lot more this spring and this summer, I think there's a little bit of Romeo Langford to him in terms of his body, in terms of the smoothness with which he does things. I think you'd like to see him become the sort of knockdown shooter that really, really matters in college basketball nowadays. Structure, obviously, for all of these players could be an adjustment to a certain extent, but he is an unbelievably gifted player from a physical perspective, from an athletic perspective. Purdue has a couple of voices in his ear. I think Brandon McKnight, who's a former Purdue player, is very close with his family. Jaden Ivy is from Mishawaka, originally the Purdue signee, knows Blake Wesley very well. I think that Purdue has some advantages there, and I think Purdue is in a pretty good spot with him. It's a matter of how that process plays out. He's been offered by Texas. He's been offered by Louisville. Indiana's offered him. He's got offers all over the place. So he's also a very high-end recruit. We'll see where he kind of fits into things for Purdue, but I think Purdue's got a shot there too. So that's 4 guys on top of Caleb Furst right now, where Purdue, is in a pretty solid spot. I don't think anything's imminent on any of these guys. I'm not aware of anything being imminent, but I think everything's imminent for everyone right now because nobody's taking visits. There's been no spring evaluation period. I think all that's going on with COVID-19 shutting everything down is going to accelerate things for a lot of guys. So I think anything can happen at any time. And I think Purdue, that's 4 guys Purdue's in either a great position with, a really good position with, or at least has a puncher's chance with. On top of the possibility, too, that when normalcy resumes, if there's any evaluation period in July, if you have to go into the fall during the evaluation period, there's always other guys you can get in on, too. Another guy I haven't mentioned, I think he's probably a long shot for Purdue, but Matthew Cleveland from Atlanta is like a 4-star guard from Pace Academy who put Purdue in his top dozen or something like that. I think he's going to be a really hard guy for Purdue to get. That's another high-end player, though, that Purdue is involved with at least. So this is a pretty star-studded group Purdue is recruiting. The one scholarship being the issue, but also the blessing in the sense that you don't need to close out 2 or 3 of these guys. You just need to get one more to have a great class. If you can get 2 more and oversign by 1, then you will have signed a great class. Whether or not Purdue, if they can get 1 more of these guys I just mentioned, whether they would go add a 3rd guy, just add a 3rd guy, I doubt that. But you never know about the possibility of them getting 2 of these guys I just mentioned too. That's obviously a big ask, but also not outside the realm of possibility either. Last year at this time, Purdue got the 2 guards it wanted in Jaden Ivy and Ethan Morton. Obviously, then went into the my monitor just went to sleep. That's the effect I have on my computer. Then obviously went into the season chasing Hunter Dickinson. That didn't work out. Chasing Ryan Kalkbrenner. That didn't work out. But Purdue is in a really good spot right now in recruiting, both in this class and in general. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Purdue signs a really, really good 2021 class. They're off to a hell of a start with Caleb first. That's what I got. Next time you see me, once again, the walls behind me will be a different color, and there will be much rejoicing. So that's what I got, everybody. This has been your goldenblack.com daily quarantine simulcast. It's been brought to you by Fod's Purdue Bookstores, Purdue Federal Credit Union, the 6th Street Dive Restaurant, First Source Bank, East End Grill, and the Charters Team Remax Ability Plus. Want to remind you once again, breaking news here on the Daily Quarantine. The East End Grill is now open as well for carryout orders. If you're looking for a hell of a dinner or just to support our local businesses through this difficult time, please keep them in mind. The East End Grill in downtown Lafayette, the 6th Street Dive in Lafayette, Arnie's in Lafayette, West Lafayette, and all over the state, Bruno's in West Lafayette, and the Whitaker Inn in West Lafayette. They'd love to hear from you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend and be safe.